And joining us from his hotel room, he's made the time to do this on the road from Orangeburg, South Carolina, one of the leading entertainment attorneys and voice actors in the voiceover space, Rob Siglum Paglia. And for those who don't know Rob was actually the attorney that represented Bev Standing in her action against TikTok. I guess that was last year, 2 years ago now. Rob, thanks for making time for us today, man.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, it's our thrill. So the reason that you and I are talking today is we had on Remy Michelle Clark from Dublin, Ireland, and Remy shared the story of coming to awareness that her voice had been somehow lifted and was being sold. The website that she found her voice on was called revoicer.com. We also learned from Remy that she had done some AI voice work for a little company called Microsoft. And that's when you reached out to me, Rob, and said, "Hey, this sounds familiar in some way." So tell us why this rang a bell for you, Rob.
It sounds very familiar because a few years ago, I was reviewing all these contracts because the big four, Microsoft, Apple, Google, and Amazon, were creating voice banks with voice actors. And this is like the second phase. The first phase, what they were doing was taking people off the street and handing them a $50 gift card and having them go in and record a whole bunch of sentences and things like that. And so then they realized they were getting garbage in, garbage out.
Right.
So they weren't really getting real good synthetic voices. So they moved on to voice actors. I was looking at reviewing a lot of those contracts back during that period of time, 2018, 2019, 2020, around there.
So this was
And
going into the pandemic.
yeah, just right around when the pandemic started. But that's when they started going really heavy, 2018, 19, 20. I don't know when they crossed over exactly to start using voice talent. But, basically what the contracts they were asking talent to sign, they would give them, between like 2 and 5 grand. And they would say, you have to, we're going to send you scripts. You have to read 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 lines, whatever it is. And right in the contracts, it would say, you're waiving your rights. These files, these may be used in a manner you don't want to in the future. They'll be used by third parties. And Microsoft started the Azure. I don't know how you pronounce it.
Azure. I've always said
Azure.
Azure,
That
but
that
yeah.
that's their database, and that database feeds all these other little revoicers and other
Yeah,
little
it's their cloud service.
databases.
Hmm.
Exactly. So when they were agreeing to do the jobs, they were agreeing that that's how it was the usage it was going to be. It was going to be used for AI and wherever and however. And it very explicitly states it right in the contract. There's no doubt about it. I had tried to even try to negotiate some of those contracts for some of the talent that knew the risk that they were taking, and we were trying to get them more pay. And I remember one of the responses I got from one of the smaller little companies out of China that were doing the Azure database, and I had asked for like 10 grand or something like that for the talent. I remember the response that we got was ha ha.
So
So
there's no, if I'm following this correctly, there's no, if you've signed that contract with Microsoft, there's no recourse to be able to renegotiate that contract later with them. But there, if I'm following correctly, there seems to be some recourse with the end user, the revoicer.com in Remy's case. Is that correct, or I'm messing that up, huh?
no, because it says in the contract that's what Microsoft is going to use that for. They're going to use it for other databases. They're going to use it for creating an AI voice. They're going to use it for third parties to sell it to third parties. And you have no right to go after those third parties or to Microsoft because you're accepting a payment, whatever the payment was. So by signing those contracts, and I wrote an article about this on VoiceOver Extra, I told the talent, I called the contracts career suicide. You're committing career suicide if you do this. And I would always tell the talent, look, I'm not going to tell, I don't know what your financial situation is. I don't know if you need the money, but just know your voice may show up somewhere that you don't agree with in the future if you sign this and you do this job. And most of the talent didn't sign the contracts. They said, okay, I'm not going to do this. Some talent still did it. And I'm not surprised now that there's going to be a lot more of this that comes up that you're going to see. You're going to have a lot more stories like this. In fact, I saw one on LinkedIn today, same similar story. Oh, my voice is being used, if by another third party for AI.
Yeah, it seems like
because
we've been getting beat up by these stories in the last 3, 4, 5 weeks.
yeah, because now this is when they're done building the databases. When they were building the databases, they had no idea what their business plan was. They didn't know how they were going to make money on this or exploit the voices. Now they're starting to get business plans into place. And now that the technology has gotten a lot better because you've got text to speech, you've got speech to speech, which are two distinct things. AI has gotten a lot more lifelike, a lot more human. So it's now this is where they're starting to implement their business plans. So now you're going to start seeing these things, in speaking to the companies. In fact, a couple of the companies actually called me, and I went over their contracts with them to tell them what was fair to voice actors. So there's a few of them out there that I know. Well, there's actually quite a few out there that are thinking about the ramifications of how it can affect voice actors and how they can work with them. But some of them didn't care.
Is it possible? Let's say, you're an audiobook narrator. You've got a lot of long form content out in the marketplace that in
Yep.
theory, any company with any technological savvy could lift those files. Do most voice actors have enough material out there that an AI voice could be created just from the material that's in the marketplace?
Okay, so are you ready to get scared now? Are you
Sure.
scared yet? You
I'm
ready to get really scared?
I'm gonna go grab my teddy bear.
Now the technology exists where they only need a really small sample of your voice, 10 or 20 seconds or 30 seconds or something like that. I don't know the exact amount, but it's a very small sample. And that sample can be taken from anywhere. It can be taken from YouTube, it could be taken off the internet, it could be taken off files that you sent in. So, and actually the technology is being used in the film business because a lot of the ADR now that's being done is being done where they're not calling the actors in. They're just taking the soundtrack that they recorded for the film and using it and to fill, to do the ADR.
Wow.
So that's how the technology is being used in a positive way. I think that's a positive way to use it. The big four were the ones that were making the databases. So they were getting as many voices as they could
Gotcha.
into their own database, their own proprietary database. That's why they're having you sign the contracts because those are that becomes their property, right? So, like if someone were to lift your podcast, say, or my voice off of this and used our voice in an AI, that would be illegal. They can't
Okay.
just lift our voices and use them without our permission, without our consent. So that was why the big four they had the campaign to have contracts signed so that they had their own proprietary voices so they could do whatever they want with them. They could sell them to the smaller, like, so it's like, say one of these the smaller technology like a revoicer, that if they suppose they wanted to start some kind of database, a text to speech database or a speech to speech database, they would
Right.
go to one of those four and get the license from them, and that's what they do.
And we had an instance of this come up in very recent months. FindaWay Voices, now owned by Spotify, has had an arrangement which has since been maybe completely, maybe not completely suspended, where they were providing voice files to, of all folks, Apple. And SAG-AFTRA, the union, stepped in and lit a bunch of people's hair on fire. And now FindAway Voices slash Spotify and Apple have said that they've suspended all of that technology, all of that activity, all the way back to the beginning for union voice actors. Do you know, Rob, if that suspension also covers non-union voice actors?
I don't know, but the find a way situation's different. So I need to make the distinction. The
Okay.
find a way voice situation and the AI cloned voice situation are two very different situations. So in the find a way contract, the find a way contracts, there was a little clause that said the files that you're recording can be used to train other voices, train synthetic voices, or train AI voices. So
Okay.
they're not actually cloning your voice and using your voice. What they're doing, so like say a Siri, they want to make Siri sound more human. So they would use the files to copy how humans speak and how humans emote, so that Siri would train off of those, learn off of those files, and that's how they
And
use it.
that,
So
to me, is the most insidious part of all of this, because that skill is at the core of what we do as voice actors
right,
and performers.
right. The laws are, obviously there needs to be some kind of legislation that gets put into place, and there is legislation that's being proposed in all 50 states and the federal government in order to regulate how AI is used. If a criminal wanted to take part of your voice, use it to call your bank, and then, you know,
Well, now
which I don't have my account, so it matter.
the banks have voice authentication now. So,
Right,
a deep
exactly.
fake can
Right,
impersonate your voice and get access to your money. So this is not
exactly.
this is becoming not just an issue for voice actors, for writers, for whomever. This is now becoming an issue for the public in general, and we've got to start wrapping
Right,
our heads around this.
right. And that still is illegal, which is good. It still is illegal for someone to use your voice without your permission.
Sure.
They can't use your likeness
Right.
without your permission. So those things are illegal. It's I'm not really concerned about straight theft because that the law still can deal with. It's more of this: how do you deal with the internet taking 5 words of one article and 5 words of another article and 2 words of another article and putting it together and making a new article,
Right.
or 3 words of your voice and 3 words of my voice and 5 words of another narrator's voice, and then teaching Siri to sound more human. How do you deal with that? It's just
So now for the folks that haven't passed out of abject fear, if you're still with us, what can we as individual freelancers, what can we do first individually to make sure that we're at least taking, let's start with the reasonable steps to protect ourselves from this sort of crap happening to us?
so the way you protect yourself as a voice talent, number one, read your contracts. Make sure that you're not, if you can, keep copyright of your files, ownership of your files. That's the best way to protect yourself. Because you mentioned Bev standing at the beginning. That was how we went after TikTok, because there was no contract that Bev signed. So I just registered the files that she had recorded in our studio, registered them with the copyright office, and we sued TikTok for copyright infringement, and that's how that case went. So
This, in some respects, this resembles broadcast, the way we sell and license broadcast voiceover. Now, there's a specific end date and a specific use, correct?
right, right, it should be the same thing. That if you approach it the same way, because AI is really just a clone you. So if
Right.
you just license it the same way that you license protect your own live voice, then it's the same protections that you're going to have for your cloned voice, or for making sure someone doesn't clone your voice and use it without your permission. The National Association of Voiceover Artists, NAVA, they have a section on their website about AI and how to protect yourself. And I wrote the rider for them.
We put the link to that in last week's video description, in the show notes, in the description. We'll also include it this week. And I want to mention too, Rob, you don't have to be a member of NAVA to access that material. The writer,
Right.
there is also a contract template on the site at NAVA. We'll put that link in the show notes and the description.
Let me just talk about speech to speech a little bit, because
Okay.
that's where right now, that's where voice talent, that's another area where voice talent can take advantage of this technology.
Okay.
Speech to speech is text to speech is where you have synthetic voice. You type in the text on your computer, and then the synthetic voice says what's typed in, right? Speech to speech is where an actor performs the script, and then the synthetic voice, whoever it could be anybody's voice you want it to be, is put it over the top of the actor's performance, right? So it's like motion capture, same kind of thing. So motion capture is big now for actors, right?
Right.
They do the motion capture for animation. So just like that, speech to speech is big now for voice talent. I see a lot of speech to speech jobs. Respeecher is the main company that do those jobs, and they pay decent money to voice talent. Thousands, maybe tens of thousands of dollars to voice talent to, like if they want to create a speech from, for instance, a professor from the 20s, they have some of his audio. You only need a little clip. Remember, this is where it's beautiful with this new technology. You
Right.
only need 30 seconds or so, or a minute of the way that professor spoke, and then they'll write the script, they'll write the speech, and they'll have the actor perform it. Like, you go in a studio, and you record it just like you do any other voiceover job. And then, but it's not your voice. That's the end result.
So the lessons that I've taken away today, Rob, number one, read your contracts. And if you have any doubt, I would imagine you need to contact somebody that's well versed in this stuff, like you, like a seasoned entertainment attorney. And number two, I think the other takeaway is let's just not hit the panic button yet. Yes, we have to protect ourselves, and yes, we have to advocate for ourselves, and push for legislation that's going to protect us. But at the same time, there's going to be some opportunity that's going to come up because of these new technologies, and we need to be open to them. We need to be adaptable to them, and I think generally, and this goes for life overall, you need to have a generally positive attitude. Trust and verify is probably the whole
Right.
conversation that we had, right? Trust and verify.
Yeah. I mean, and I could see the opportunity now, which is why
Yeah.
I'm very optimistic about what's going to happen in the future because I can see that there's talent that are being hired to implement these technologies. And where I see talent just closing the door on it, saying I don't want to know anything about AI and I'm not going to do anything about it. I think it's a little short sighted. They should at least find out what's out there
Right.
and learn about it before making that decision and automatically thinking that AI is going to replace them because it's not the case, in my opinion. And the other thing I want to say about protecting yourself, it's also very important when you speak to an attorney, speak to an attorney that understands AI because it's very specific. I hear attorneys talk about copyright all the time when they talk about AI, and they're two different things. If there's an attorney that's doing entertainment law that's not up on artificial intelligence, that's not the attorney to talk to. I'm not promoting my services. I'm just saying when someone's going out to look, to make sure that the contract is going to protect them, make sure they understand what AI is and the future of it.
Rob Siglampaglia from Orangeburg, South
Orangeburg, South
Carolina.
Carolina.
Thanks for spending time today with us, Rob.
No problem. Thanks.